You're listening to Errol Parker and Clancy Overall, editors of the Batuta Advocate, on Desert Rock FM.
Well, welcome back to Desert Rock FM 96.5, the Batuta Advocate radio show here with Clancy Overall and Errol Parker. And today we have a guest who is, one of Queensland's favourite sons, definitely Caboolture's favourite son, the prince, the young prince, the baby of the house, Wyatt Roy. Thank you for joining us, mate.
Hey guys, thanks for having us on.
Great to have you here.
It's good to be here.
Now, what are you doing with yourself at this moment?
Enjoying life.
Yeah.
It's a lot less stressful, and I work for this interesting US-based company. I run their Australia operations, which is pretty liberating, to be honest with you. And I think beating up on politicians is a national sport. You know, it's not going to go away anytime soon, but there's a lot of life after politics, and I'm really enjoying it for, a whole bunch of reasons.
So is that how you found yourself over in Syria, wasn't it?
Not technically Syria. It's a bit of a grey area.
Yeah.
Northern Iraq.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't this company. It was... it's an area that I've had a lot of interest in for a long time. I've actually been to the Middle East a bunch of times, and I'd been to Iraq before, but obviously under pretty different circumstances. But a friend of mine, a really good mate, he at the time had this really weird job where you can't sort of talk too much about it, but basically he worked for a private company on counter-radicalization. So how do you stop young people in northern Iraq basically going over to ISIS?
Yep.
And he said, come spend a few weeks with me and have a look at what we do. And so I did.
He convinced you to not join?
He was very, very, very eloquent and very convincing to not take up arms with the bad people. But no, I mean, seriously, these guys are, it's kind of interesting, I guess, but they are really taking on pure evil. I mean, these are blokes who put women in cages and burn them alive and do these, horrible crimes against humanity, literally committed genocide or tried to commit genocide. And he was fighting the good fight to stop them.
Yeah, it's definitely a different road to go down to what most people do after politics, and that's probably go and work for Gina Reinhardt or go and work for a bank.
She wouldn't take my phone call. It was really weird.
Whoa.
You tried.
No, I'm joking.
You tried. Well,
it's not on speed dial.
But you do miss 100% of the shots that you don't take, Wyatt, so...
You might get a job in the mining sector.
That's true. I'm pretty happy where I am, I got to tell you.
So it's called adventure tech, what you're in? Is that...
It's actually artificial intelligence. I mean, it's full of all these buzzwords. But basically people that are a lot smarter than me work in the business, but we work with the world's largest companies. So I think, big banks, telcos, insurance companies, and help them with their customers. And it's an interesting piece of technology that makes them a lot of money and helps their business. So it's interesting to be working with cool people across the globe.
So looking back, elected at 20 years old.
Yeah,
20 years of age.
I just turned 20.
Just turned 20.
I was 19 when I was running.
So did you at any point in how many years were you sitting?
So it was 6 years, two terms.
2 terms.
1 in 5 days I was on Earth. I was a member of Parliament.
Yep.
It's a bit weird.
Did you think that was going to be your Christopher Pine? You were going to be there for 25 years?
Never.
No?
And I used to always talk about this as well, and I think people probably found it hard to believe in some ways, but I really don't think politics should be a career for life. As weird as that is, going in when you're 19 or 20, I think it's a strange profession. It's weird. You should go in there to make a difference, right? To change the country for the better. And I think if you're actually going to do that, you need to take pretty big risk. That means you're probably going to be faced with your mortality because you can lose seats and do whatever else. And at 19, I had no desire to be, Christopher or Philip Ruddock or whatever. I just wanted to do something. And I mean, you never know what the future holds, but I've got to tell you, doing this second career is really interesting. And I think people our age probably have 6 or 7 careers in their lifetime. And it's always the way I've thought about this thing. I don't think you wanted to be there just to make every decision to keep you there, because you ultimately wouldn't do anything. If you do nothing in politics, you can get re-elected forever. It's a really sad kind of indictment on where politics is at, but I didn't want to be a career politician.
So did you have an exit game? Did you have an exit strategy? And were you caught by surprise when...
No, I wasn't. I mean, it's hard to kind of admit, but I wasn't caught by surprise. I mean, it's a marginal seat. I won it off the Labor Party. I had a lot of people throwing a lot at making sure that I didn't win. Of course you want to win, and I think I lost by less than 1%. So it is what it is. And my primary vote was higher than a lot of people that sit in the parliament today. But of course, you can lose, and you have to have a lot of zen about that. And on election night, you're probably pretty upset, and you worry about your staff and the changes that those people have to go through. But for me, it was frankly pretty liberating, and within a few months I was in a very happy place.
So 2 terms was just long enough?
I mean, it was great. I mean, it's not just 2 terms, right? It's actually what did you do? And I mean, some people spend 20 years in Parliament and do less than I did. So, I was a minister. I did a big reform package. We changed stuff across 9 government departments, tax changes, education changes. That's why you go into politics. Imagine if you go into politics. Imagine if you're a Labor MP elected in 96. You could never have touched government benches. You could never have touched doing those things. So for me, 6 years is a long time, and I think politics, you kind of live in dog years. Was it enough? Well, what was enough was changing the country. That was exciting, and that was something I'm really proud of.
And who would you say, and you're more than welcome to name names, is an example of someone who has made a very long career in politics out of doing nothing?
Well, I don't want to name names, but this is how I think about this. There are...
Wayne Swan.
He doesn't like me. I don't know to like stick the knife in anymore. But
Wayne did save every person in this country from financial ruin in 2009 when he gave...
Yeah, not Peter Costello or John Howard.
No.
Who are those blokes?
Guys.
Can't even remember. I think the way that I think about this is there's 200-odd politicians in the Parliament. If you had a workplace with 200 people anywhere, you'd have good people, bad people, lazy people, smart people, whatever. And of course, there is a percentage of the Parliament that frankly are... they call them seat warmers or whatever, and there is some of that, but there's also some people who are doing an enormous amount for the benefit of all of us, and that's a great thing.
Yeah, including all the backbenchers from the National Party that they do.
They're making a valuable contribution
service
to the future of the country at the moment and helping our democratic debate. So even former deputy prime ministers,
Oh, here we go. Now, I mentioned Wayne Swan earlier because he was technically a neighbour, wasn't he, in terms of the electorate?
Close enough.
I mean, Caboolture was your hometown?
Yeah, so he was a couple of seats away.
Couple seats away.
Yeah, more of a city bloke.
Yeah, right. You were a bit deeper.
Yeah.
And what was the demographics like when you threw your hand up at 19?
In my seat?
What did you see? Did you grow up in a agricultural household?
Yeah.
That's an interesting run. Nationals don't have a foot in around there, or
I mean, they do. And like my pre-selectors, because in Queensland we're one party, one big happy family. Half my pre-selectors were old National Party members, and I do come from a farming family. My family is strawberry farmers. My family actually traditionally votes for the Labor Party. I'm the first person in my family to finish high school, including 2 older brothers who I love dearly, and they do other things, but. Dad was so good at grade 9, he said that they asked him to do it twice. And that's kind of the background. So it's just like, we're happy for you to finish school, let alone go into politics. But for me, the Liberal Party is kind of the story of my family, of the Howard Battlers, of aspiration. And I really am a very proud Liberal because of the philosophy. And that's how I, found myself in this party in pretty unexpected circumstances. I didn't expect to be in politics. I wasn't a political junkie.
Did you expect to be moving as fast as you did? You were in the cabinet within... one term.
Yeah.
Well, I think you have to be ambitious, and politics is governed by opportunity and circumstance. So, I don't think there's any point being there unless you're trying to do something. And you're right. I mean, it was a pretty, I was a minister relatively quickly in my career and lost an election relatively quickly within my career as well. So it's just the nature of politics. But as long as you're out there advocating for stuff, I think people recognise that at some point.
Yeah, no, I'm just trying to unpack how you can not be that involved in politics, not be a junkie of it per se, and end up being elected to the House at age 20.
Yeah, it's a weird story. So how it actually happened, I was helping out a mate of mine. He passed away a couple of years ago, but he ended up in a wheelchair. And I was pretty good at economics. It's the one thing I was pretty good at. And my economics lecturer said to me, you understand economics, but you also understand social justice, helping people. And it's a cliche, but if you put the two together, you can make a difference. And she's like, you should join a political party. And it was the last thing I thought about, but she convinced me and I did. And I realized if you are confident without being arrogant, and there's a huge difference that often gets lost in people in politics, and if you're prepared to kind of have your say, when you become involved in the political party, you actually can, start to get to know people, make differences, whatever else. And then for the LNP in Queensland, a pre-selection is just a plebiscite. So as long as you're a local, you can vote. I had a pretty contested pre-selection, but I overwhelmingly won that. And I think part of that was because I think everyone knows how bad politics is, but I just wanted to talk about how good it can be. I think people kind of ran towards that, and even though they were, might have been differently aligned to me philosophically or whatever else, I think they were prepared to let me have a go and see what we could do, and it worked out. So it was really quick, obviously, but don't think politics has to be governed by, the way it's always been done, or factions or unions or whatever else. People can get involved.
And how long had it been since there was someone from the Liberal Party in that seat?
It had only been 3 years.
Right.
So it was a seat that we had held from 96. It was formed in 96, so it held from 96 to 2007. It was a big loss at the 2007 election. It was held by 1% when I was pre-selected. I think that's partly why there's a lot of controversy, because it wasn't like, here's a 19-year-old to run somewhere weird. It was, here's a seat we should win.
Because that was a seat that was held by Mount Bra.
That's right. Yeah. And like on 2007 election night, Howard came out and said, it's one of the biggest losses that we've had. So it was important we won that seat back, and we did. Yeah.
It was funny that Howard actually came out and said that after he lost his own seat.
Yeah, but that's true. Actually, I mean,
this is one of the worst.
His priorities, right?
It's like John, you're unemployed. What are you doing?
I reckon he's doing okay now. I reckon he's probably all right. I saw him the other day. I think he's pretty happy.
I mean, we won't go into that, but I'm sure he's doing all right.
He's
got that Catholic Church money backing him. He's all good. Now, tell us a little bit more about the area. Caboolture, the family, are they still in the game?
Yep, very much so.
Still
Farming is hard.
frost?
Like, farming is really hard.
How did the needles and all that shit affect?
Badly. It was a really tough year for my family, as it is. They're strawberry farmers, so it's tough. It's hard.
Yeah. That was something that they felt instantly, wasn't it?
Yeah. What's the funny thing about strawberries is, so there's like 23 million Australians, 25 million Australians. In Queensland, we grow 45 million strawberry plants.
Yep.
It's like, you can get up to like 5 punnets a bush. You do the math. And we don't export strawberries. Mm-hmm. It's a lot of strawberries for people to eat. So supply and demand makes that industry tough. If you have good weather, you get a oversupply, prices crash. If you have bad weather, well, farming's stuffed. Throw some needles in on top of that. Yeah. It's a really, really hard industry. But, people don't go into farming for that type of farming for businesses. It's a lifestyle choice. They've done it for generations.
Yeah, right.
So it's a character building experience for my family, I would say.
So would your family, they've been in the area for a while?
For generations, yeah. Right. Literally, the road that I grew up is called Roy's Road because it was named after the first people who moved there.
In that particular part of the world, they always talk about a certain kind of, even out to Kingaroy and peanuts and stuff is very kind of European kind of background. Yeah. And were your family involved in any of those kind of traditional forms of land clearing with 2 tractors and a chain?
They were, absolutely. I don't know whether I'm going to win any inner city votes in this interview, but no, like literally what it was back in the day, people wanted to live on the hills, and the farm is on the water. It's on the Pumstone Passage, and so my grandfather rode a rowboat down the passage. And he saw a citrus tree and he said, that's a good place to grow citrus. Yep. Got like 1,000 hectares on a peppercorn lease, which is like nothing, and developed a farm. So, dug dams, but, the old-fashioned way and cleared it. And, I don't know, I think it's a nice kind of pioneering spirit.
It was a different time.
Lost now. You couldn't really go do what they did today. I reckon we'd be in trouble. Maybe late at night when no one's watching, I'm not sure.
Well, I think all of us can dream about the future that Ag Force wants us to all live, where everyone's got their own dam. Yeah. Everyone's got their own cleared bit of country. Mm.
And you can knock things down as well. That's another thing. Remember, Joe knocked down Cloudland in the middle of the night. And
people have really forgiven him for that and moved on too,
Well, they opened a new Cloudland in Fortitude Valley, so I think everyone's forgotten. I reckon. Now, tell us a little bit about the mentorship, because as you said, you were traditionally Labor family, and then you found your place in the party. So you weren't walking into the Liberal Party saying, this is the philosophy that I've grown up with and this is what I'm going to bring to it. You kind of went in as an open canvas, cleared canvas, would you say? Or
No, I wouldn't. I did come into it with a strong philosophical grounding, but it was a lived experience, not something that's, off in the ether somewhere. I mean, my dad started his working life as a labourer and on the end of a shovel and worked his way up to foreman at a earth-moving company before going back to the farm. He was able to send me to an all right school after both of my brothers dropped out at a quite young age, and he was really determined to give me that opportunity. That's essentially what the Liberal Party is, right? It's about equality of opportunity, not subsidy. It's about aspiration. And so I have those strong philosophical convictions, and I definitely brought them into the parliament. That's what our country should be, is aspirational. It's when we're at our best.
And what do you think of the current Liberal Party?
Well,
in power. Well, you're not involved in it anymore.
No,
so
I'm not. No, but I'm good mates, obviously, with a lot of people that are still there. I don't know. I think there's a bit of a tragedy happening. I think the Liberal government has done a lot of really good things, but politics is very tough at the moment. And I think the challenge for the Liberal Party, and this is true for political parties across the globe, is how do you deal with the rise of populism? Mm-hmm. And the contest that my side of politics will have over the coming years is, do we stay true to those convictions that we just spoke about? And I think, and if we articulate them, we'll be successful. If we indulge in populism because of the way politics is changing with the media and whatever else, I think that's a very bad, bleak future for our party, and that's going to play out over the coming years. So I obviously hope that, if we stand on what the Liberal Party has always stood on, I think we'll be very successful. It's a pretty tough time politically at the moment, as it is in the US and France and UK and everywhere else.
It is an interesting one, because the conversation you're saying right now that the Liberal Party needs to have is one that the Labor Party don't even need to have, because in Australia anyway, because it is almost like a Bradbury moment. It is
definitely a Bradbury moment. I mean, I don't think anyone's running out in the street saying, Bill Shorten's going to be a great Prime Minister and throwing rose petals in front of him. But I tell you that the thing that will play out with the Labor Party in a similar vein is they will have a contest, if they win the next election, between inner city left and working class Labor. Yep. Yeah. And I'll bet you a beer now that will play out in a very big way, in the same way that we'll have to fight populism. So both parties have big challenges.
Well, there's a couple of people in the Labor Party who are going to be stuck in the middle of that. I mean, you've got Albo, who is from a dyed-in-the-wool kind of working class upbringing, housing commission, and then just 2 Ks away, he's got the absolute crux of the inner city lefty, who hasn't ever held a shovel. Do you think that's going to be just as bad for the Labor Party as the rise of the far right in the Liberal Party's been?
Well, I think it's going to be just as bad I think it's going to be worse for the country. That's actually what matters. If these people win and that plays out in government, that's a really bad thing for the country. And I don't think, because of where politics is at the moment, anyone's really aware or discussing what that will look like. But we're already starting to see it. I mean, look at Adani, look at border security. And this is before the guys even have to make one decision on this stuff. When they're in government and they need to make decisions around, aspiration and tax, and the wheels are going to come off very quickly.
And they can't change leaders.
Yeah, exactly. And they can't. I mean, Well, as much as Albo, does anyone seriously think Albo wouldn't be a better leader of the Labor Party? I mean, there's just no way. Yeah,
it's an interesting question. It is a Bradbury thing. Yeah, it is a Bradbury moment. Now, do you think, though, as you mentioned, with the populism, which obviously exists in the far right and it can exist in the far left, but a lot of the things that seem to be doing the Liberal Party aren't necessarily new ideas. Catholicism and the church has been a bit too prevalent in the Liberal Party for a long time, and that is still getting trotted out by certain...
Not only have these ideas existed for a long time, they have existed by our political opponents. I mean, the idea of renationalising industries, that's Bernie Sanders' policy. That's not the Liberal Party. Yeah. And that's when I sit there and you sit there and you listen to some of these populist type things, and they call them conservative. That's not conservatism. That's populism. I mean, we're about getting government out of people's lives. We're about small government. So these sort of populist things that get thrown around now, and you see it all over the globe. I mean, it is really frustrating because it's not like the founders of our party would have been talking about renationalising industries or these sorts of things. And
that's catterism.
Yeah, it is absolutely. Yeah. So what are we going to out Catter? We're going to out Pauline? It's ridiculous.
Where do you kind of sit right now politically? You think you've done your bid? You think you've done your dash?
I mean, once it's in your blood, it's very hard to get rid of it. And I love the private sector and what I do, and at this stage of my life, it's a really good place to be. Yeah. One, because of the political cycle, but also just personally. I mean, late 20s and being in federal parliament for another 6 years or whatever at the moment is probably not great, but I would never rule it out. The idea of sitting in parliament today is not what would get me out of bed.
So just talk us through the first coup, if you wouldn't mind.
We were in Canberra.
There's a whole bunch of people that are still alive and running around that will write books on this stuff that I don't need to get into. So,
but
what have you got?
The Killing Season Part 2
there'll be an ABC doco again. Can't wait.
But was the first coup essentially, as you said earlier, how things in politics should be there to benefit the country? Was the first coup to benefit the country or Malcolm Turnbull?
No, everyone will have their own reasons, and I think in the Liberal Party, it genuinely is a bunch of individuals who vote. So everyone's going to go through their own thing. And this swapping of prime ministers is a disease that is a bad thing in our democracy. I'm not going to argue against that. But we do live in a Westminster system. And if we couldn't change political leaders, I mean, you would never have had Winston Churchill. Let's be really blunt about how our system actually works. So for me, and I can only talk for me, I think the Liberal Party articulated what we were against very obviously. And Tony was an incredible opposition leader and did a good job at that. What worried me was in a world that is really changing, we have big challenges, we needed to articulate how we were going to address these challenges and give the country hope. Malcolm has, now people will commentate on the success of this, but he has a real vision for what this country can be and what it should be and how we could get there. And so for me, it was, I really believed in him, and I still believe in him, and I believe in that and that type of liberalism. What I don't believe, what worried me was, if you said to people, what were we? Not the Labor Party. Well, that's great, but we need to be more as a government. And if you actually look at Malcolm's record, I mean, he lowered taxes, he took on the unions, he stood up for small business. These are all things that Tony couldn't get through the Parliament because of the type of politics he'd adopted. And I don't actually think in this environment, hyper-partisan, super aggressive politics is what our country needs, and that's where we clearly were going.
And you've got a feel for the pineapple farmers after the shirt front incident, don't you?
Yeah, exactly.
Do you know any other industries that struggled after Tony Abbott threatened to assault Putin?
No, we
I can understand people
heaps of our kangaroo meat
Really?
goes over to Russia, and
did go to Russia.
Yeah, and
I had a kangaroo abattoir in the electorate, and I went to Russia.
Yeah, a couple of them did. Yeah,
a lot of exports stopped overnight.
Yeah.
When once the Russians had translated what the fuck shirt front meant.
Well,
I don't think I need to give a character analysis of my former colleagues, but I think it's fair to say Malcolm's probably a little bit more of a statesman, so might have handled that a bit differently.
And so, how did you feel? With all that in the rear view, driving down Venice Beach in Adventure Tech, when you heard that your party were considering putting a former highway cop from the Bruce Highway kind of Kalangar region.
Well, he was
My neighbour.
He was actually a drug cop. He was a narc.
He was a narc.
Yeah, he was.
How do you know that? Do you know that from talking to people, or have you had to run in? Or?
We get mail from letters to the editor from punters who have told us about getting arrested for cannabis by Peter Dutton. They'll never forget that face.
That is a pub yarn and
a half. How did I feel? Malcolm summed this up pretty good when he called it a unique sense of madness that had got into these people. I mean, you cannot explain this thing. You cannot explain the madness that went into why these people did this. And then the only other emotion I would just say is sad. I mean, Malcolm is a really good mate. He's somebody who, I admire. I wouldn't be where I am today, and just to see what happened and the madness that went with that, I mean, that's just sad is the emotion.
Do you think he did the right thing by resigning?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, does anyone seriously think that, former politicians hanging around in Parliament is particularly PMs is a good thing? No.
Well, he
always said he would. I mean, what's the surprise? I mean, he always said that he would.
It isn't like he needed a job.
No, but that's also another good reason to get out of Parliament. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, this is somebody who is hugely successful, has done all these incredible things. He can put his talents to good use, or he can sit on the jetty with Lucy. I mean, it doesn't really matter. The point is, whether it's Kevin or Tony, or these people just shouldn't still be in the Parliament. And as somebody who's very happy outside of Parliament now, I can tell them they should be out of Parliament.
Do you reckon, and you probably definitely won't answer this question, but do you reckon there was booby traps put out in his final hours? Do you think there was a moment where Turnbull said, look, it's not going to be me, but it's definitely not going to be you?
I wasn't there, so ask him.
Yeah, we'll get you on the podcast one day, Malcolm, or Alex at least, because we know you'll be listening to this.
Or Lucy.
We'll catch up with your mate Wyatt. Now, who were your mentors in that capacity?
In Parliament? Well, Malcolm, obviously, you got to understand, when I got elected, we were on the rise in opposition, came into government, a big landslide with Tony, so, it wasn't like Malcolm was sort of the heir apparent. We became very close very early. Julie has been an amazing mentor and friend over the years. I think probably the dynamic that played out is when I went into Parliament, I was very conscious of a lot of people saying, hey, a young person shouldn't be here, sit on the sidelines and, you're a token or a novelty. What I did was actively seek out the advice of a lot of my colleagues. And I think the more senior they were, the better the kind of relationship we developed, because you're not going to threaten them. Where it was probably harder was sort of, people who might have been in Parliament for a couple of terms and hadn't made it to the front bench, and there's that natural competitive spirit. But I became very close with a lot of my senior colleagues who are now lifelong friends from very early days, which is weird. But
who called the first spill? Simpkins.
Don and Luke. Yeah.
So you kind of got along well with those.
No, Don was
WA.
Well, Don was a great mate. Don likes a cigar and a drink. He was a good guy.
You were almost too young to even be involved in Young Liberals.
Well, yes is the answer. Strangely, so when I decided I wanted to get involved in politics, not with the idea of being a federal MP, but to make this difference, I had just moved back to Queensland after spending a year in Melbourne, and I went to a branch meeting of the Sunshine Coast Young Liberals, and I remember it was so weird. It was, all these people wearing a suit sitting in this little hall, and
they are the weirdest people.
It was unusual. I love them, but it was a bit weird.
Those Young Liberals are spooky.
I'm
people.
sure Young Labor are just as strange, but
they're all incels.
Yeah,
all of them. All of them are just like, mate.
We'll invite you to the next branch meeting, but
just go out and do something, mate.
So this is what happened, right? So I went to this meeting, and I sort of politely said, probably make this a bit different. We could put the meeting in a pub instead, and we could, get some interesting people along. My second meeting I went to, 3 people ran for president of the branch. 2 candidates got 1 vote each, so they voted for themselves. I got every other vote and became president. We radically changed it. And the first thing I did actually was organise this Christmas party on the farm, which you can imagine taking a whole bunch of Young Liberals out to the farm. It was interesting. And then I was pre-selected within 8 months.
That's fucking.
Basically,
because
you
hardcore, man.
You walked into that room with some basic interpersonal skills and suggested having a beer, and you became their leader.
Mate, it's how you change the world.
Right.
One beer at a time.
So just
or rum and coke, maybe.
You've obviously been on the inside of the beast. From a personal interactions you've had, what's the Prime Minister like? I mean, I just can't get a good read on
the
it.
Current Prime Minister.
The current one. Number 30.
Who is it today?
33, isn't
it? Scott. 30. No.
He's the 30th.
30th? Oh, I thought we had
Scott John Morrison.
Oh,
the 30th. Current Prime Minister.
Well, it's only like 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So, look, I actually really like Scott. He and I have, some different views on things, obviously, but I have always found him incredibly good at listening and actually doing stuff with it. So when we came to government, talking about Iraq before, I was one of the first people that called, or actually probably the first person in the Liberal Party who said, let's double the refugee intake, taking the Yazidis who are facing genocide at the hands of ISIS. You can imagine in that time when Scott was immigration minister, stopping the boats, all of that, doubling the refugee intake wasn't an easy conversation. He was so good. We sat down with it, we worked through it together, he actually listened, and we eventually adopted it. When he was Social Services Minister, I was chairman of the Social Services Committee, and it was like, young people off the dole and the GP co-payment, all this stuff. He and I genuinely worked through that together. And he is someone who I think will give you the time of day. He's a good listener. He does actually have a strategic mind about this stuff. He does think deeply about policy, and I really like him.
So do you think he actually said, as it's all in the media now, it's like, Scott said in a cabinet meeting that we should do.
Well, it wasn't in cabinet, a shadow cabinet. But yeah, it was when I was in Parliament. I would be amazed if that was true. I don't know. I wasn't sitting in the room, but I would be really amazed. If you actually look at what Scott has done with the Islamic community, particularly in Sydney, and it's something I have spoken to him about over the years, there's no way that I would see that. I mean, this is a guy, when he became Prime Minister, he said he wants to do 2 or 3 things. One of those things was bring Australians together. He actually believes this, so I think the idea that unfortunately, I think that's a bit of Machiavellian politics.
Everyone needs to win elections, don't they?
I don't think that's how he wants to win elections.
No one likes being in opposition, do they?
Well, you can't do anything in opposition, but I don't think that's how you win an election.
Lunchroom, you've got the tinier offices. It's not fun. It's
not fun.
Now, tell us a little bit about the current state of. Morrison actually doesn't really represent the rot, as a lot of the commentators are saying. He actually was a middle ground between Turnbull and Dutton. What are your thoughts as a neighbour of Dutton?
Yeah.
How has Dutton, who seems to have been such a problem for the Liberal Party for so long, managed to remain in such important positions and get given so many calls to make?
It's a hard question to answer, obviously. Peter, look, Peter definitely isn't afraid of a fight, and there are some talents that you can put that to in Parliament. Now, does that mean you should be Prime Minister? Probably not. But I would... it's a question I don't have an answer to be honest with you. If you can tell me why people thought Peter should be Prime Minister, I'd like to know the answer to that question.
Who were you backing in that
Malcolm.
Well, obviously Malcolm,
yeah.
but would you have...
Well, I mean, of course you would have voted for Julie.
Yeah, Julie.
It's a vote that should never have happened. We shouldn't be where we are today. I can't see a world... I mean, I really like Scott, and I think it's, I actually think he's doing a really good job despite the circumstances, and I think most people would agree with that. Reasonable people would agree with that. But, I mean, Jules... I think it's a tragedy that she never got to be Prime Minister.
Well, the thing is, she's employable when she leaves. A lot of people
have the best time of her life now.
And you as well, and Pine as well, and Turnbull will all be in work.
Yeah.
A few other people might, if they lose their seats, become unemployable. But you're never unemployable once you've done your time in Parliament.
I don't know. It's like any workplace, mate. 200 people.
Has any MP ever died a pauper?
You remember when we spoke to Bob, and he said that, he said, listen, Sir Joe is not a crook. He never was. He said, I went and saw him when he was dying. Yeah. There he was in his 3-bedroom red brick house in Kingaroy. He died in a small house without air conditioning.
But Lady Flo was still in politics for years after he got out. Lady Flo was, she was the breadwinner.
She invented phys ed.
Did she?
Yeah. In Queensland anyway. It was adopted around the country.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Have you had the pumpkin scones, the whole thing?
Yeah. Well, no, and it was funny. We actually had a guest on here. He's an actor from LA, Luke Bracey, whose mother was living in Atherton Tableland. His mum was from England. And she was brought out there by her husband, who was Australian. And they spent the first few months of their marriage, he was out working and she was at home. And she honestly thought that Sir Joe and Flo were satirical characters on the news each night. She when she'd bring the scones out during the press conference, she thought it was like a Humphreys-esque character. So.
Just one more thing while we're on the Nationals. We've seen recently that the marriage between the Liberals and the Nats now is on the rocks. We might have to get some marriage counsellors in. Has it always been good? In your experience, were the Nats always there to kiss the feet? No,
definitely not. And I'm a coalitionist. I obviously have my philosophy and my beliefs, but I really believe in John Howard's broad church, and the Nats and the Libs are best when they challenge each other in a respectful way, not a weird way, and complement each other. I think that's a really good strength for our side of politics. Where the wheels come off is, when you see what's sort of playing out. And again, this goes back to my point. I mean, the National Party at its best is when it's the party of elder statesmen, of people who are... I mean, the National Party actually doesn't have that many farmers in it that much anymore. And I think
lots of miners.
Yeah, well, different backgrounds. But I think when you have those elder statesmen from the Nats and people genuinely from rural communities, that's a good thing to balance out my friends from the inner city who are Liberals. I think that's when we are at our best, and we have been at our best. I mean, look at the Howard government; it was successful for. I mean, look at gun laws. I mean, this is a big thing, and it divides a lot of communities. Very relevant at the moment. It was the partnership between the Libs and the Nats that got that through and did it well, and it just couldn't have done it if that didn't exist.
And also, Howard played a dirty game when he wore a bulletproof vest when he was speaking with the shooters.
Yeah. I think he regrets that one.
Well, he made them look like crazies. He got it through. Now, who would the Labor Party be teaming up with if they were ever in the position where they needed to form a coalition, or would it be shooters and fishers? I mean,
but it's not even a hypothetical. We know because they have coalition governments with the Greens. I mean, they have coalition government with the Greens in Tasmania, in the ACT. It's a really bad thing. I mean, the Greens, they're not environmentalists anymore. They're communists. They're not. They're the sons of Che Guevara. They're not. They're not sons of Bob Brown anymore. And I think that's a really worrying thing.
Do you worry about the Enviro bros?
Right, Lee Rhiannon should be sitting around a coalition, with the Labor Party dictating economic policy. That's a bad thing for the country.
Yeah. And tell us a little bit about where you see this. It was an interesting point you made earlier with this divide in the Labor Party between the working class left.
Yeah.
Where are you? Where would you say the heartlands for those kind of electorates are?
Yeah, well, seats like mine. I mean, my seat. So every state seat in my old seat, which is a kind of mortgage belt, semi-rural growth seat, were always held by the Labor Party. Working class. Those are the areas where I think are the heartland of any really party of government. They're either Howard Battlers or they're working class Bob Hawke type people. That's ultimately where governments are decided. The strange thing, and I hope I'm wrong for the country's sake, but I actually think the left on the Labor Party are actually starting to win these arguments more than the working class. And that partly is why I think if Bill does win the next election, the wheels are going to come off this thing very quickly. And you can see the Labor Party running to the left on. I don't know, where is the Labor Party running to working class today? I can't think of the issue, but I can think of the left ones.
It depends on where they're visiting, isn't it? But
yeah,
Adani,
exactly.
for one reason.
Well, it was just like the other day how Michael McCormack, he was on the news and they asked him if he knew off the top of his head any policies that the Nationals are putting forward for farmers, and he couldn't.
Exclusively for farmers.
Yeah, and he was like, it was like, do they benefit the farmers over the interests of these giant, big coal miners, iron ore miners? And he was like, no.
I mean, this kind of comes back to, it's not even just about, someone who comes from the farm. I always think it's a bit weird when we just talk about the farm. It's small business versus big business.
Yeah.
The Liberal Party is the party of small business, and farmers are small business people. But on to, on this Labor Greens thing. I mean, this is not the party of Bob Hawke. That's really clear to me. I mean, this is the party of Gough Whitlam. It's not the party of Bob Hawke. And if Bob Hawke was around today, I could see why people would run at that. But there's no one like that in the Labor Party.
He isn't dead yet.
No, I love Bob.
No.
Bob and I used to hang out at the Woodford Folk Festival every year.
Oh, yeah, that's
together.
near you.
Yeah. No, I admire Bob for many reasons.
Gimpy Muster, was that in your electorate?
Just out.
That was a good show.
It is a good show.
The Toyota Gimpy Muster. Now, you just when we'll finish on this, you're saying that Shorten is trying to be a Palaszczuk Labor and an Andrews Labor at the same time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've got it in one. I mean, the Palaszczuk Labor of do nothing, be small target, but then very much beholden to, and I think that's probably because it's a national Labor Party rather than the state one, beholden to extreme left-wing views of either inner-city lefty types or some pretty left-wing militant unions, which are not working-class unions anymore, they're political apparatchiks.
Well, as long as he doesn't become a Michael Daly type in the Labor Party, he should have it in the bag. Yeah. Just don't
Fingers
say
crossed that's not the case.
Any racist things in Western Sydney.
Don't be a racist and you can get elected.
Don't be a racist and you'll end up in Parliament.
And the seat of Maranoa remains under the tight stranglehold of the haircut.
Yeah.
David Littleproud.
Yes.
Don't expect any swinging in this seat anytime soon. But thank you, Wyatt.
Thanks, mate.
The swing whisperer. And we're not sure. He hasn't really indicated, but maybe making a dash back in the next election.
Or the one after that.
Or one after that.
Or the one after that.
Or the one after
I've
that.
got heaps of time.
We'll wait for the IPO.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. And for those playing at home, I don't think he was kidding. Wyatt Roy is about to be a very, very, very wealthy man. And until next week, it's his one poor man signing off. Errol Parker, stay out of the pokies. Never talk to the cops without legal counsel present. The police are only out to destroy your lives.
And I'm Clancy Overall. You be kind to each other. And if you really need something to put on your resume, maybe try your hand at a couple terms in the lower house.